good, YouTube? Welcome back to Your Questions Answered, and today we're talking about fallen angels. What does the Bible have to say about fallen angels? Because it's a really interesting subject, area of much intrigue. The question on paper that I got was, did Michael imprison the wives of the fallen angels, also known as the Watchers, in the Book of Enoch, in the Bible? The answer is no. Either in the Bible and in the Book of Enoch, Archangel Michael doesn't actually punish the wives of the Watchers. What it does say is that the Watchers themselves were punished, the Watchers being the fallen angels of Genesis 6. This rabbit hole gets deep. So what I'm going to do is read the Bible first, and then we're actually going to go to the Book of Enoch. And then I'm telling you why we're actually going to the Book of Enoch. As someone who doesn't necessarily think it's part of the Bible. We're going to start off with 1 Peter chapter 3. And the Apostle Peter starts talking about baptism, but he relates it back to the times of Noah and the angels who did not obey in Noah's time. 1 Peter 3:18, he says, "For Christ also suffered once for sins, that righteous for the unrighteous, that he might bring us to God, being put to death in the flesh, but made alive in the spirit, in which he went and proclaimed to the spirits in prison, because they formerly did not obey, when God's patience waited in the days of Noah, while the ark was being prepared, in which a few, that is, 8 persons, were brought safely through the water." He then goes on to talk about how baptism corresponds to the ark and how those who were on the ark were saved. But the thing is, it's interesting, is the Apostle Peter is saying in the window between the death and resurrection of Christ, of Yeshua, he was alive in the spirit and actually preached to a very specific group of spirits that were around in Noah's time that were rebellious. The thing is, that seems very strange or very obscure. What does that mean? Where is he getting this from? The thing is, the Apostle Jude even says the same thing. In Jude chapter 1 verse 6, he says, "And the angels who did not stay within their own position of authority, but left their proper dwelling, he has kept in eternal chains under gloomy darkness until the judgment of the great day." So the Apostle Peter talks about these angels, a very specific group of angels from Noah's time that were rebellious, that Christ actually talked to, the specific group of entities between his death and resurrection. And the Apostle Jude talks about how there was this group of angels who left their position of authority. And he actually says that that was a similar sin to Sodom and Gomorrah, where in Sodom and Gomorrah, they wanted to have sex with the angels that came to visit Lot and his family. So the Apostle Jude is talking about sexual sin. Apostle Peter actually says the same thing in 2 Peter too. So we have actually a lot of this stuff in Peter and Jude. And he says, 2 Peter 2:4, "If God did not spare angels when they sinned, but cast them into hell and committed them to chains of gloomy darkness to be kept until the judgment, if he did not spare the ancient world but preserve Noah," then so on and so forth. So he's making a point of those who God judged in the past. And again, he's talking about angels who sinned, cast into hell, and committed them to chains of gloomy darkness until the judgment. So in the Bible, when it comes to the fallen angels, it's not necessarily talking about Satan or the devils associated with Satan. It's talking about a specific group of angels from Noah's time that are chained until the final judgment and that are guilty of some kind of sexual sin. When we synthesize 1 Peter, 2 Peter, and Jude, where are they getting this from? This actually gives us the lesson of why it's so important to look at the Bible in its cultural context. And this is where the Book of Enoch comes in. Because the Book of Enoch actually shows us what the ancient Israelites were thinking about. See, we have the original story in Genesis 6, where the sons of God saw that the daughters of man were beautiful, and they had sex, and they produced the Nephilim. The Nephilim were understood to be giants. The thing is, there's been different interpretations about this through history, throughout church history, but the reality is this: as a pretext to that, ancient Israelites understood this to be spiritual beings. The Book of Enoch is actually a testimony of that, where they understood the sons of God to be spiritual entities. They understood the Watchers, the Nephilim, to be giants. And their conception, the ancient Israel understanding of demons, is actually the spirits of the Nephilim. The technical sense of the word demon versus the Watchers from an ancient Israelite perspective. And there's plenty of academic material you could look into. I would highly recommend Dr. Michael Heiser, his work on the unseen realm and on Genesis 6 and tracking what the ancient Israelites thought and the history of the interpretations, because the ancient Israelites also preserved the source material that paralleled the biblical story. So there's similar stories in other cultures that would have been written at the same time or edited at the same time as Genesis. And it shows that the Hebrews often gave their version, right? So there was a common tradition, a common belief, but the Hebrews are giving their version, but you could find similar stories in other cultures. This is called cultic competition. So the Bible tells us that the sons of God slept with a woman, produced the Nephilim, and were actually a scourge to society. They were a bad thing. It was one of the reasons for the flood to happen. Whereas other cultures praised it, but the Israelites are saying, no, this was actually a bad thing that happened. And the ancient Israelites recognized how other nations had similar stories and how they praised the watchers, so to speak, whereas in their records, they disavowed the watchers and what they did with the woman. So the original origin of this is Genesis 6, where the sons of God sleep with human women and produce the Nephilim. In the history of Israelites, we understand they understood these to be spiritual beings. The original audience understood this to be spiritual beings, and the New Testament has a lot of that material in it. So when it comes to the Book of Enoch, we can't just entirely dismiss it because there are legitimate, true things in the Book of Enoch. We know that because the New Testament not only references them, but directly quotes from the Book of Enoch in other places as well. Which means there has to be some extent, some level where the Book of Enoch is inspired, maybe not necessarily as a whole text, but as in there are ideas and concepts in the Book of Enoch that reflect the broader understanding of ancient Israel that are vindicated by the presence in the New Testament. And I believe this is part of one of the reasons that the Ethiopian Bible actually includes the Book of Enoch. The interesting thing is the Ethiopian church is the only church that has the Book of Enoch canonized, and the Ethiopian Israelites are also the only Israelites in the entire Israelite diaspora that also canonized the Book of Enoch. So Ethiopia is very unique and very Hebraic and very connected in many ways to the Second Temple period and Second Temple theology. So because it actually was given the Ethiopian Bible as a gift, we actually have the Book of Enoch, so I'm able to read you where this comes from, because the Book of Enoch was written before the New Testament. So this text was written before the New Testament, and this is what ancient Israelites believed about the fallen angels before the apostles come on the scene, before Christ comes on the scene. The main chapter is actually in chapter 10. So there are angels, they commit their sexual sin with the human womb, they produce offspring. We know that angels aren't supposed to have sexual relations and produce hybrids of angel and human seed. They're not supposed to do that. They're not supposed to have sex in the same way humans are. So they're actually punished by that. And they're essentially cursed that they're going to sit around in judgment until the final judgment. They're going to sit around in prison and chains until the final judgment, and they're going to watch all their offspring actually die before their eyes. So 1 Enoch 10 in verse 4, it says, "Again the Lord said to Raphael, bind Azazel hand and foot, and cast him into the darkness, and make an opening in the desert which is in Dudael, and cast him therein, and place upon him rough and jagged rocks, and cover him with darkness, and let him abide there forever, and cover his face that he may not see light." So Azazel was seen as like the ringleader of all of these guys. So all of the fallen angels that consciously decided and made a pact that they're going to get busy with human women, they're going to disobey God. Azazel is the ringleader. That's why he's called out for special punishment. But then a similar thing happens to the rest of the fallen angels. In verse 12, we skip down a little bit. It says, "Bind them fast for 70 generations in the valleys of the earth, till the day of their judgment and of their consummation, till the judgment that is for ever and ever is consummated. In those days they shall be led off to the abyss of fire, and to the torment and the prison in which they shall be confined forever. And whoever shall be condemned and destroyed from henceforth be bound together with them at the end of all generations, to the end of all generations." That's interesting. To me, that seems like that could be a backdrop to when Jesus said hell was prepared for Satan and his angels. Not necessarily for human beings, because in the Book of Enoch, it says how this torment, this prison, this sentencing is for those fallen angels, but anyone who's condemned henceforth is going to be sharing the same place with them. I haven't looked too much academically into the connection between that, but it does seem like there could be a concept in ancient Israelite culture, which the Book of Enoch was very influential, and Jesus is sort of going off of that when he's teaching the people around him. Main point is this. Here we have the original text where after the fallen angels decide to have sex with a woman, they're punished into this prison until the final judgment. They're imprisoned until the final judgment where they'll be burned and they'll be consummated. The end is consummated. Very similar to what we find in the book of the New Testament when it talks about the fallen angels who are in chains of gloomy darkness until the final judgment. Very specific qualifications are that there's this group of entities, spiritual entities, from Noah's time, gives us a specific time frame in the Bible, who were rebellious to God. They got punished, and the specific punishment is imprisonment until the final judgment. All of those things in the New Testament match what we find in the Book of Enoch, which came before, which shows us that the New Testament didn't come out of a vacuum, but it come from a culture where ancient Israelites already believed this. And we actually know the New Testament is referencing Enoch because there are places where it quotes Enoch directly. So they're definitely familiar with the Book of Enoch, and it shows how influential that book was, because we're talking about normal people in society who are referencing the Book of Enoch, the apostles who were fishermen, things like that, instead of just the Essenes who are out in the desert who revered the Book of Enoch. Another thing, too, is in chapter 20, it talks about how Uriel is the angel who watches over Tartarus. And that's actually the word for hell used in the New Testament when it talks about the prison of the angels is Tartarus. They were imprisoned in Tartarus until the final judgment. And that's another similarity in terms of the location, so to speak. It's a specific word that's being used that we always translate as just hell in English. Now, why does that make the Bible so interesting? Why does that make the New Testament so interesting and so dope? Again, praise God for the Ethiopian Bible. I got a lot of love for the Ethiopian church over there. Is because it shows something really incredible. Is in the Book of Enoch, what happens is the angels realize that they sin, so they actually ask Enoch to intercede for them. And they basically make a petition asking God to forgive them. And Enoch asks God, and God says no. He denies their request, and he punishes them with those chains of gloomy darkness until the final judgment in the Book of Enoch. And then they have to go watch all their sons get killed, the Nephilim. This is in the Book of Enoch. So when you understand, this is the backdrop. This is the backdrop to the revelation of Christ. This is the backdrop to when Christ appeared and was preaching to the spirits between his death and resurrection. This is the backdrop to all of that. Now that makes 1 Peter make a whole lot of sense, and it makes it so much more powerful, because what this means is that Jesus is preaching victory to the spirits in prison. These guys would have asked Enoch back in the day to intercede for them. Enoch says no, and they undergo their punishment. Now between the death and resurrection of Christ, which was the hour of darkness at hand, was the hour of darkness trying to crucify the Son of God, now Christ is alive in the spirit and is telling all of them, once again, y'all are screwed. I'm victorious. Your judgment is sealed. You see what I'm saying? The fallen angels are getting their confirmation from the Son of the Most High, from the Most High in flesh, that his plan is going just like he wanted it to. His plan is victorious. His plan is going to unfold. And all y'all in prison, y'all can still be expecting that judgment day. Y'all still expecting what's going to happen. You see what I'm saying? It's making Christ the hero of this Enoch tradition that already existed, where these fallen angels were understood to have sinned, had sex with human woman, and be punished. Christ is preaching his victory to them, because these are rebellious spirits in the days of Noah that Christ is preaching to. And we understand the cultural backdrop on why they were imprisoned and what Christ may have been saying in that window between his death and resurrection. What is really going on is that the spiritual world, the spiritual entities, the spirits that wanted to kill Christ, not realizing that that was God's plan all along, they are getting the first bomb drop that Christ is victorious before any other human did, before any appearances to the apostles, to the apostle Paul, to James, to the 500, before any human being believed and encountered the risen Christ to the point of death in these historical documents in the Bible, outside of the Bible. Before that ever transpired, it would have been the spirits that knew Christ was victorious because he is preaching his victory to them. And just like the ark was salvation for Noah and his family, baptism corresponds to this, because now when we're baptized, it's a declaration of whose side we're on. It's a declaration that we're on the side of Christ, who was victorious, who let all the fallen angels know your judgment is sealed. I am victorious. God's plan is going to win. And who totally dethroned and defeated Satan by his crucifixion and by his resurrection, conquering death. So when we go from that perspective, we see how interesting and how deep the lore of the Bible is, especially when we understand it from an ancient Hebrew backdrop. And I would say the ancient church as well often preserved this with the harrowing of hell, which was the ancient recognition from the ancient churches, is that Christ truly did go in the underworld between his death and resurrection. Now, from what I understand, I believe it was either Augustine or Athanasius who had the harrowing of hell creed. And they didn't necessarily specify in the creed itself where Christ was going to or what he was doing. It was just recognized point blank that Christ did actually descend to the underworld between his death and resurrection. That was something from the original Hebraic context that we see was preserved in the ancient church. So when we can understand that, then when we look at all of this scholarship and look at this ancient Israelite material, we see that the original context is reconcilable with historic orthodoxy, so to speak. That yes, the harrowing of hell is true. Christ truly did go to the underworld, so to speak, between his death and resurrection. In that window, he came and he let the spirits in prison know that he is victorious. He is victorious over Satan and over all the fallen angels that left their authority. Think about how poetic it is, right? These fallen angels, right? They weren't content with where they were. They weren't content being angels of the Most High. They weren't content with the life that God had given them. So they left that and decided to have the pleasures of the flesh, carnal, having sex with women and producing offspring. They wanted to be like mankind. So these angels weren't satisfied with where they were. So they left that and got punished before it. And now the Son of the Most High God, God in the flesh, who was above them, is now coming down to their level and telling them, yo, I'm victorious. Think about how crazy that is, that these angels, they weren't satisfied with their position and they sinned against God. And now God himself is coming all this time later, all this time since Enoch, and saying, yo, I'm victorious. How you like me now? Nothing has changed. Goes to show you, goes to show you for not accepting the position I gave you as being my angels. Now I myself, who has more authority than you, as God, is coming and telling you my victory. So it's really cool when you put it into that perspective. So I want to make this video because obviously this is very interesting, very intriguing, especially again from the ancient Hebraic lens. So I want to make this video to answer a viewer question, get into the nitty gritty, and this can even be catalyst for more conversations, such as the church. What is the church? Church history. I have a couple of videos about that already, but the Didache is actually a very interesting document that tells us how the early church in Jerusalem, again, the Jews and Levites at home base, operated in the late 1st century, early 2nd century. And I believe that document has very important principles for a church unity historically, as well as what we can find in the body of Christ and how we define our terms as to what is the Holy Assembly of Christ. So God willing, because of my zeal for church unity, and I pray to be led by the Spirit for that video next. But as far as this one, y'all be blessed. And always, please, if you have any questions, please let me know, because I'm not a religious authority by any means, but I am your brother in Christ and I want to be a resource to you. All right, y'all be blessed, man. Peace.